Video games, they're so integrated into our modern culture that it isn't even an insult to call somebody a gamer anymore. It's just true. Okay. Maybe that's a bit of an over-exaggeration, you might say. But is it? 2 in 3 people in the United States alone are gamers. That's a lot of people. 205 million, actually. In 2024 alone, $59.3 billion were spent on games, hardware, and accessories. And 51.3 billion of that was in content. It's not just limited to newer generations, too. 28% of people who play games are 50 or older, and one half people aged 61 to 79 play video games every week. 36 is the average age of a gamer. Now, what we're looking at in the background is my Steam library. These are all the games I own on Steam. It's quite a bit. I'll leave this to play in the background as I talk. This might be a lot of games, but quite a bit of them are free, are demos, were gifted to me, or went free for a short period of time. So let's look at how much money I've spent on Steam games, so we can see how much I've contributed that $51.3 billion mentioned earlier. So the formula for Steam works as 1 point equals 1 cent. So this place right here is dollars. These are my purchases, and therefore points, from the past 90 days. So how much have I burned on my Steam library? Well, $480.24. Yeah, okay, I know that's a bad look, but by showing this off, I want to really illustrate how this stuff appears in your everyday life before going to the big numbers. There's a level of personal disconnect that happens when numbers get so big, and I want to reflect what the median expenditure is, as I know people with less games than me and those with far, far more. Okay, putting the all too common occurrence of me being tempted by the big green sale, 90% off aside, what do video games actually have to do with the North Carolina economy? Well, I'm glad you asked, so I don't have to segue this. The economic impact of the video game industry in North Carolina is $2 billion, with a state tax revenue of $47.9 million and 2,849 jobs directly supported by the industry, and 4,005 more indirectly supported by the industry, so a total of 6,854 jobs. But who's hiring all these people? Well, many companies. Some of them smaller independent game studios, some of them giants. So let's look at the most well-known one in North Carolina. Epic Games. The Fortnite people. They make Fortnite. I mean, they do other stuff too. Like, look at all of these. Gears of War is kind of an edge case. They still have specific IP, but they still started it. They also make the Unreal Engine, which hosts games such as Batman Arkham Knight, Final Fantasy VII Remake, Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, Borderlands, Kingdom Hearts 4, Gears of War 4, Street Fighter 5, Bioshock Infinite, Dead Cells, PUBG Battlegrounds, Mass Effect 2, Astroneer, Tekken 8, Marvel Rivals, Dispatch, Valorant, and Deep Rock Galactic. Unsurprisingly, from the development of their current IPs, the creation and maintenance of a game engine, and their storefront, which is competing with Steam, they're the leading face in North Carolina's video game industry and have the most employees. In 2024, Epic Games had 4,504 employees. In 2025, they had 4,655. One notable fact about their employment status is that in 2022, Epic had 5,188 employees, which was their peak, before laying off 130 employees in September 2023, 16% of the total workforce at the time. Currently, they have 4,811 employees, so they're still growing, and they're currently hiring with 200 job slots open. If you recall the 6,854 jobs generated by the industry, the 4,811 employed by Epic Games currently is a whopping 70% of that. So, how much money are they really making to have that many employees? Well, we can check out their Epic Game Store 2025 year in review to get the details on how much they make and how they earn it. Here's a few details from the article. Player spending on third-party PC games grew 57%, reaching an all-time record of $400 million. Developers are also free to use their own payment systems inside their games, and Epic takes zero revenue from those purchases. Because developers who process their own in-game payments keep 100% of the revenue, this record spending doesn't even include some of the biggest live service titles like Marvel Rivals, Valorant, and Grand Theft Auto 5. as well as some premium titles like EA Sports FC 26. Players in 2025 spent 2.78 billion hours in third-party games. 35% of those player hours were in third-party games, so developers use their own payment solutions for in-app purchases. Quoting Epic directly, players are spending more time in third-party games fueled by competitive pricing, free games on PC and mobile, and Epic rewards. Our continued focus on developer choice and leading industry revenue share is driving success for partners and more great games for players. Epic's free games program is one of the leading things causing its Epic Games Store to gain so many customers. The free games program also continued to drive discovery and engagement in 2025 by players claiming 662 million titles through the program. Over 77% of games set an all-time peak CCU record, concurrent players, on the store during the week of their free offer. This delivered measurable halo effect across the broader PC ecosystem, including a 40% lift in Steam CCU while the title was free on the Epic Games Store. At the end of 2025, the Epic Games Store now has over 6,000 titles available. How does Epic split their profits, though? Well, the revenue share model was reworked in June 2025, so, quote, developers can keep more of the revenue and reinvest directly into the studios and projects. Starting then, developers keep 100% of their first $1 million in annual net revenue per product per year, before the standard 88-12 split applies. In 2026, they'll also be launching an official program to help developers sell more games on the Epic Store by, quote, leveraging the marketing power of Fortnite. This means that players who purchase participating games will get a Fortnite cosmetic along with the matching character avatar for the Epic account profile. Upcoming partners include Capcom, MiHoYo, Pearl Abyss, S-Game, Mint Rocket, and Cowcow Games as the first to participate. Now, that's just some of the exports of this industry with how many games are being sold, and the revenue from the third-party games being sold via the Epic Games Store. All right, doing pretty good so far. Let's see, how much do I got left? Oh, oh no. Oh no. How long is this video so far? Oh no. It's gonna be like 10 billion hours long when I'm done. The next portion of this video is going to be analyzing how the gaming industry might function under different economic systems. Starting off, we have... Okay, well, this might be a bit complicated, but let's see what we can do. The goal here is to figure out how production and consumption might look. It seems like how consumption presents itself would be reliant on how and what products are made. So let's first define a traditional economy, and then we'll figure out what production would look like under it. Now, a traditional economy is pretty much defined by a few key traits. So let's figure out exactly what we need to have. Little governmental oversight, goods and services were traded primarily through bartering rather than using money, most likely not connected to a large regional network, communal roles, each person specialized in a specific thing, traditions, customs, and family roles influence economic roles. So you need to have something along those lines to be considered a traditional economy. But now that we've figured out what a traditional economy is, it sounds pretty rural, right? Definitely not conducive to video game development. Sure, most of them are rural and are found in developing areas of countries. Some even nomadic hunter-gatherers. There's no shame in not having a mega uber complicated economic system. But just thinking about a traditional economy like that, video game production is pretty much a no-go. But there's another archetype that falls in the definition of a traditional economy. What can you think of that has little to no governmental oversight, communal roles, distance from modern society, and traditions and customs that influence economic roles? Yep, that's right. A cult. I didn't have many options for traditional economy that is advanced enough to have steady access to technology, okay? For our video game producing cult, we'll start by nailing down our specialized roles. We'll need to figure out what goes into developing a video game, step by step, which will then help us compile a list of a bunch of different roles that need to be filled to do those steps. From there, we'll try to narrow it down. All of this won't be for nothing, at least, since we can use this knowledge to help us figure out how the roles might be differently filled, or entirely new ones could be introduced depending on the economy, helping us out later on the line. The first step of us needing to start anything is a goal, especially in the case of game development. we'll need to have a vision. We need to know what we're going to make. Then we'll need to make it. There's lots of moving parts when it comes to this. How we take the vision we have and choose to represent it in the final product is where we have to break it into smaller pieces. The environment/setting the game takes place in, the smaller details represent the story through the environment. Art is a big portion of this, with sprite work, modeling, concept art, background art, and textures. Then you need to have actual gameplay features to make the game engaging to play, and have a way to actually dynamically have an impact on the world, therefore telling the story. Things such as enemies, mechanics, quests, combat, and UI are all important to this, and the goal is ludonarrative harmony. There's specific features that are different from game to game, as not all games are the same. Finally, there's the finishing touches, such as sound effects, music, Easter eggs, and voice acting. Then comes the distribution, which can be done in many ways, most commonly through online marketplaces, where you'll need to advertise your product with trailers, taglines, and enticing enough hook to reach your target audience. That's a lot. So, what jobs are part of all that? Well, we have concept artists, writers, lead developers, coders, musicians, modelers, sound effects creators, visual effects creators, game testers, level designers, voice actors, physical actors, in case of using mocap, UI planners, background artists, sprite workers, distributors, advertisers, and publishers. Now, these are the roles that you can find at many AAA companies hiring people for, but smaller game studios don't have the reach, the budget, or the manpower for that kind of stuff. Well, you'll find in smaller teams that they combine these roles. After all, you don't need a separate person for each specific segment, and it helps keep the vision more concise if the person who came up with the ideas ends up working on executing them. So, what stuff needs to be done? And what stuff can be done by one person? Now, these can be broken up to groups: planning, coding, art, sound design, and marketing. These are the most basic roles that these things can be organized into, and in smaller teams, people are more likely to be doing multiple of these roles, or at least responsible for making sure that the functions are implemented. For example, by hiring a freelancer to do specific parts. So our video game production is going to look like this: a lead developer who organizes the overall game design, such as UI, quests, enemies, does the environment design, and writes/conceptualizes the story. Also responsible for advertising and publication of the game, most likely self-published. An artist who makes concept art based around the lead developer's ideas, does sprite work, background art for environments, visual effects, and produces a soundtrack and sound effects. And a coder who implements all of these features, tests their functioning, models and renders assets, and plans out level layouts/the nav mesh in accordance with the environments designed by the lead developer. Now, the consumption of games in the traditional economy would be somewhere along the lines of members sharing them via bartering or trading. The three people who consist of the game industry and the community would only be a few, so the fellow members of the community would have to come to them for access. And that's what production and consumption of video games might look like in a traditional economy. Ta-da!